I had to go back and re-listen to my lesson from 2 weeks ago because I forgot where exactly I had left off. But it was kind of good because I got to listen to myself again, and as Dan has always said, when you listen to yourself, you critique yourself pretty harshly. So I kind of critiqued myself and thought, I need to maybe slow down just a little bit and maybe have a few references to some of the verses that I just kind of pull out of the air. I know we all know them, but sometimes we don't know where they are. And that's one of the things that I think we need to be diligent at, is knowing where they are. Because if we talk to someone and we say, well, yeah, the Bible says this and this, they're going to say, well, where does it say that? Well, I know it's there because it's up here. But to know exactly where it's at in the Bible, that's one of the things that I think is important. So I'm going to diligently try to do that a little more. But from what I understood last time, we were in 1 John chapter 2. And I think we had gotten through basically the first 3 verses of 1 John 2 when we ran out of time. That was 2 weeks ago. Which verse 3 said, we know that we have come to him to know him if we obey his commands. And we talked about that a little bit the last time, because if we know we are obeying his commands, we know that we know him, right? So it must be important to obey those commands. It's not something that we can just take. I think we had mentioned last time, do we obey just a couple of them, or just the ones that we find easy to obey, and some of those that are a little tougher, we can pick and choose? We have to basically obey all of what he tells us to do. So starting in verse 4, it says, the man who says, I know him, does not do what he commands, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. Do we know people like that in the world today? They say, I know him. I know God. I know Jesus. Paul.
It's interesting how John's using the word know here. He's still playing off the previous context of fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
Twice mentioning fellowship.
Right.
That somebody that says that wants to present themselves as being in fellowship with God when they don't do his commands. Well,
right.
No, you're not.
Right. Because anybody can say, I know God, can't they? Well, I know God. I know God exists. There's a lot of people out there that believe in God, that there is a higher being, that there is someone that has created. Not everybody is an evolutionist. There is somebody that has created this. They believe there's a spiritual being, but when they say, yeah, I know God, do they really know God? That's what Paul's saying. What is knowing him? What is knowing God?
Well, for me, it was, I believe there was a God, but for me, it wasn't until I didn't know him until I started reading the scriptures and following.
Exactly. Right there. Following what he has written down, which are what? We can say the commands, we can say the word. All of that is the same thing, isn't it? When he commands us to do something, it's what? From his word. If we're following, if we are in the word, then we're following what he is telling us. That's when we truly get to know or get to fellowship with God. Because just stating that I know him, we're basically a liar. Because if we're not doing his commands, we're a liar.
I think that's a lot of times what we miss. We don't spend the time to get to know God.
Exactly.
You know, you look over at John chapter 14, when Philip, and he's talking to the disciples there, he says, Jesus said, have I not been with you so long that you still do not know me?
Mhm.
It says, whoever has seen me has seen the Father.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think too many times we don't look at it in that perspective. Because like First John's saying here, if you know him,
Mhm.
it's automatic, you're gonna obey him.
Right.
But we don't spend enough time to know him. You know, it's almost like your kid, your teenage boy, everything you do is wrong.
Oh,
It
exactly.
isn't until he gets in a more mature state that he starts understanding maybe, you know, Dad wasn't so stupid.
Right.
You know,
Well, he gets to know exactly what
Right.
was meant by what you were saying.
and that's why we need to be more mature in the faith so we can understand it better.
Because as a new Christian, do we truly know him? We're getting to know him when we become a new Christian. And we're going to see that later on when he talks about children and young men and fathers. 3 classifications there. But when we're new, we're getting to know him. As we live our life and continue to follow his commands, we know him more and more each day. We become more mature. We start understanding. Do we completely get to the point where we understand everything that he's got here for us? It's a work in progress, clear to the end. Excuse me.
Yeah, Apostle Paul addressed this in Titus 1:16. It says, they profess that they know God, but by the works they deny him, being abominable and disobedient.
Mhm.
That's a good word.
Yep.
A lot of times people say, well, I know God. If they don't go to church, they don't know anything else.
Exactly.
According to this, they're disobedient.
Mhm.
They really don't know God. They know of God, but they don't know God.
Right. Right. If we look at that, the man who says, I know him, but does not do what he commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. It was pretty, when I was studying this, a guy came up with how to present this verse, and I thought it really said something here. All the verbs are present tense. So basically it says, he who keeps on saying, I know him, and keeps on not keeping his commands, keeps on being a liar, and the truth keeps on being not in him. It's continuous. It's present tense. If we don't do, we are not there. So it makes it very important that we pay attention to what he is telling us, isn't it? In verse 5, but if anyone obeys his word, that goes exactly to not obeying his commands, but if he obeys his word, God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. His love is truly made complete. That's how we should feel, shouldn't we? If we're doing his commands, if we're following him the way we should, his love should be complete in us, right? Do we have that completeness of love? Do we feel that completeness of love? This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. So if we have God's complete love in us, and this is how we know we're in him, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. Very simply, that says we are to walk the walk. Walk what we talk. If we're obeying him, we need to act just like him, don't we? Do we do that in all ways? I mean, when we really look at our lives, do we live like Jesus? And I'm not saying we need to walk around in robes and sandals. I'm saying, we have the same attitude, the same compassion, the same mercy, the same love that he had for the people around him. Paul.
And that verse 6 really is his fourth point he's making about fellowship. That's the conclusion of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
The case for fellowship. Fellowship with Christ, how would you know that?
Exactly.
Because you're walking as,
In chapter 1, it talked about walking in the light. As who? As he is in the light. Same thing here. It's saying we need to walk and live like he did. So, back again, are we doing everything we can to have the same attitude that Christ did? To everyone around. Now, it tells us many times in the scriptures that it's easy to love a good neighbor. It's easy to love your brother. But it's the other people. And you know what? Jesus had a lot of other people around him. How easy is it to have compassion and mercy and love for them? And that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? He commands us to love our brother. He commands us to love our enemy. He tells us we need to have compassion and mercy if we are going to show that we live like Christ. That's a tall order. I'm going to speak for myself. That's a tall order. Because there are some people that really aren't on the top of the list with me as far as having compassion and mercy and love for them. Because, they might have done me wrong. They might have irritated me.
Jesus showed that on the cross.
Exactly.
Father, forgive me.
Exactly. Do we have that same attitude? Because that's what he wants us to be perfected in having. That's why he gives us all these commands. He knows we're going to fall short. I'm so glad that he gave us grace. He knows we're going to fall short. But is our mindset to try to do the very best we can to do those things? Or is it kind of like, grace is there, so I really don't have to work that hard on loving my enemy? I mean, that, in all honesty, do we kind of have that to fall back on sometimes? We don't take it quite as seriously as we should. Because I can't imagine being around some of the people that Jesus was around. And then at the end, what they did to him. I can't imagine still having an attitude of love for them. Still having compassion upon them. Having mercy. It's almost beyond me able to fathom that. Because I would want retaliation. And the thing of it is, I'm human, and I may not be able to give that retaliation. It may not be physically, may not physically be able to do that. But the thing of it is, Jesus was. Jesus had every bit of power to retaliate. He could have taken himself down off the cross. He could have snapped his fingers and they'd have been wiped out. He had the power to do that. But yet, his whole mindset was to do his Father's will. That is the same mindset that we should have. To do our Father in heaven, his will. And in order to know what his will is for us is what? Looking to his word. Looking and seeing, okay, what do you want me to do, Lord? Now, yes, you have lined it out already in Matthew 26 that I am to go into all the world as your disciple, teaching them, baptizing them, teaching them everything that I know. And some people do a very good job of that. But then, like I said, then he says, love your enemy. And that's where, boy, it gets to be a point of like, well, isn't there something else that I can just do a little more of and cover that up? No, there isn't. Jill.
I don't know, I saw a footnote here, I'm looking at it, to know, this is knowledge, is a knowledge, assurance gained through experience and relationship. So don't you think the more experiences that we have, and we do it according to what you've looked in the scriptures, that's to know, and the relationships that we have, right? Because really, honestly, most of our, like you're saying, it's people. That's mostly what we're walking through this world, right?
Right.
We're trying to be in contact or get to know or whatever. So each experience that we have, isn't there assurance in those experiences when we do them God's way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And in relationships even. And that gives you that relationship with God.
If we do, as we're saying, if we do his commands, if we do what he tells us to do, our relationship gets stronger. We know him more. Paul.
I was just researching some references on John 2 and verse 5, talking about the man in him, truly the love of God. Can be talking about the man, not God. In him, his love for God is completed.
Right.
Part of that argument, he says, I love God. Well, no, you really don't. Your love for God is
shown.
is incomplete if you're disobeying him.
Right. Well, and it goes to James, isn't it? Where it talks about how do you show your faith? How do we show what 2:14? James, what good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? If we have faith and no deeds, it doesn't show our faith, does it? Not saying that we need to work ourselves to heaven. What it's saying is that we're showing our faith by what we're doing. We're showing our love to God by how we are following his commands, how we are following his words. That's showing how much love we have for him, by how much we do for him as a servant.
And I think this whole thing summed up, Paul mentioned it, like he says in verse 3 of chapter 1. He's talking about koinonia, the fellowship, the close relationship with God. The more we're in that fellowship, the more we're with him
Right.
in our spirit, the closer we'll become and the easier the rest of this will be.
Yep. And I think that is something that we need to constantly work on. I don't think that's something that we can grasp in a certain amount of time and say, hey, I got it. It's constant. I think it's something that we always need to be looking at more and more. You can compare it to a job or learning a job or learning a trade or anything else. When you first start, do you know it all? You don't. I mean, you can go to school, you can go to engineering school and that, and you know everything in the books, but it's all the jobs that you do that are different. Wow, they didn't have that one in the book. Now let's see, I'm going to have to use a lot of things to put together to make this work. Exactly. When you get married, do you know all the answers?
Do you know any?
You don't know nothing. You are blank slate here. I don't know what to do here.
It changes every day.
And that's what we face. We are married to Christ, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay? We're married to Christ. He's got all the answers. And He's trying to teach us those answers. He's trying to teach us how it's going to be in this relationship. This is what I want you to become. Now, I would not suggest men to say, this is what I want you to become to your wives. Because a lot of times that's not going to work. But He is telling us, this is where I want this to go. This relationship is going down this path. I don't want you straying over here or over there. I want you to go down this path. And everything will work good. And He's already got, if we look in here, He's already got it all figured out for us. He's got a plan for us.
It doesn't change.
And it doesn't change. It's not a changeable plan. He's got it all. The only thing that will change it is us. If we decide not to go along with it. If we decide, you know what, this plan is too difficult. Or I don't see any benefits that I'm getting out of this plan. Which, when you look at His plan, I don't know how you can not see the benefits. Because in the end, it's a glorious wedding feast. And I wouldn't want to miss that for nothing. But, as in a marriage, there's going to be some struggles, isn't there? Most of them, in fact, I could probably guarantee you, all of the struggles will be because we don't agree. We want to do it our way. And that will cause problems even in our relationships here on earth. If we say it's going to be my way or the highway, it's probably going to be pretty difficult. Unless we try to work things together. But He has it all laid out for us so that we can follow His words and continue on, going in the proper direction. But just giving lip service is not going to cut it. We have to do what He tells us. Verse 7, Dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. Dear friends, who's He talking to? He's talking to the world? Nope, He's talking to what? Christians? Beloved, dear friends, my children, those are all endearing to someone that is very close. I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. They've known it since the beginning. This old command is a message you have heard. What is that old command? What was the old command? Love one another. Pretty basic, isn't it? That was from the beginning. As He says, I'm writing you a new command. Let's see. Yet I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in Him and you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is already shining. What is the new command?
He's referring back to chapter 1, verse, what it's announcing to them in chapter 1, in verse 5. This is the message which we have heard from Him and announced to you. And immediately in chapter 1, it's talking about the light and the darkness.
Yep.
So He's picked it up again.
Again.
He's circled around. And, okay.
And he's reiterating, right. And if you compare chapter 1 with chapter 2, it's all going the same way. If we walk in the light, if we follow his commands, he is faithful and just. It all is on the same tone, I guess you would say, of what he's trying to get across. Dan?
And could this mean, from the beginning, I wanted you to love one another, but, you guys have strayed and started hating your enemy. But now I'm telling you a new commandment that you continue to even love your enemies.
Exactly.
It's kind of how I kind of look at it.
And ultimately, the command, old and new, is to love, isn't it? The bottom line is to love.
But he's taking it to a higher level.
A higher level. How do we love God? By doing what? Following his commands. How do we do anything in this world without love as a Christian? How can we do anything without love? Is it going to be pleasing to God if we do anything without love? Because what? God is love. How can it please him to do anything other? And yet sometimes our love is a little lacking. So that's where we have to work on.
Sure.
Yes.
This reminds me, sometimes people have looked at strange at me when I said the most loving thing God did for us is give us the commands.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that case, people don't want God telling them what to do.
Yeah, we don't want rules and regulations.
Don't tell me how I have to live. But, that's the most
Loving thing, yes.
yes, I'm not making light of what he did through Christ, but that's all according to his commands as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he loved us enough. As it says in John 3:16, he loved us enough to send his son. He loves us enough to give us these commands to live by. How much love is that? I mean, if we didn't have these to live by, how would our life be? If we didn't base anything on what we know from this book, how would our life be? What would we have to live for?
Look at the world, that's what it would be like.
What do they live for? Exactly. What does the world live for?
So,
Hate, self, pleasures. They live themselves. That's probably the most right there is self. They live to please themselves. That is one of the things that we have to combat daily because we want it our way. We think, oh yeah, I would really like that. Is that pleasing to God or is it pleasing to me? Everything we do, we should run it past that. Is this pleasing to God or is this pleasing me? Now, God gives us lots of pleasing things. But the first thing we should ask is this pleasing to God? In whatever we do. If we get that thought that goes through our mind about our neighbor and his dog came over and done the deed on our yard. Okay, that thought, was that pleasing to God? When somebody pulls out in front of you in traffic, cuts you off, immediately your mind goes, was that pleasing to God? And yes, we slip. Dan.
And you'll probably get to this if you get down there, but in 1 John 3, chapter 15, verse 15.
Verse 15.
Verse 15, it can't get any stronger than that. It says, anyone who hates his brother is a murderer.
Yep.
And you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him.
And that's just saying
How important
hates.
is love?
Anyone that hates his brother. That's not taking a knife to his back, is it? That's not pulling a trigger. That's just hating him. Now, what is hate? What is the definition of hate?
Opposite of God.
It's opposite of God. It's the opposite of love, isn't it? It's the lack of love. I think we had that at one time, and I can't remember exactly what that is, but it is, hate is the absence of any kind of love.
Well, could it be loving less?
That's what it is. Loving less. Hating is loving less.
Because he says about eating it, doesn't he just want mother and father? That scripture
Mhm.
is, am I saying that right? Loving less.
Right.
Um,
I mean, we are
We
to,
can take that, like you say, the hate sounds like, oh, I don't hate them, but you could love somebody
less. Exactly.
I heard somebody one time say, hate is the devil's sugar.
Yeah. Mhm.
Feeds it to you, and you like it.
It is, yes. It's very easy to have that attitude of loving less, or, well, it's not going to hurt to just not really like them. Paul?
Oftentimes the opposite of this kind of love is just apathy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just, I really don't care. And do we have that attitude towards some people in the world? Or even maybe towards some Christians? Just a kind of take it or leave it type attitude?
That's who he's writing to, is Christian.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How are you treating your beloved, your one who's supposed to be your dear friend?
Mhm.
That's it.
Yeah, if you don't really care. And that's what he's trying to point out, is how important it is. The old command, as Jesus, I can't go to the exact verse where it's at, but Jesus told us, you heard that you love your neighbor. I tell you, you love your enemy, right? Well, that goes a little further, doesn't it? Who? It's easy to love my neighbor. He's a good guy. To love our enemy? Is that easy?
We also need to be careful, especially in the brother, that we're not showing that subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy when someone attacks you, but it's a lot of times because of just something, we alienate ourselves from that person, and we have to be careful of that.
Yeah. Because that goes right along with what Paul said. Kind of like apathy. Well, I'm not really going to put myself out.
Sometimes we even do it without thinking about it.
What's the scripture? Whatever man thinketh in his heart, that's,
Yes.
if you're thinking it all the time, it will come out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what a struggle that is, isn't it? We struggle with that every day. Every day. What goes on in our mind? When we hear things about what's going on with the government and that, does that make you a little upset? God! Well, is that good to be upset about those things? I mean, because our thoughts can just go, can't they? And then pretty soon it's like, boy, I wish they'd just get rid of that guy. Well, where's the love in that? He's a lost sinner. He's one that will go to hell if he does not turn around. And that's what Christ looked at from the cross, hanging there. He looked out upon the crowd and seen all of those people out there that were going to be going to hell unless they changed their heart.
Verse 9 there, that's what he's saying.
And he still had love for them. He still said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And he says, that's what we need to be like. Anyone who claims to be in the light, verse 9, but hates his brother is still in the darkness. Whoever loves his brother lives in the light, and there is nothing in him to make him stumble. Once again, he gives what happens when you're not doing right and what happens when you are doing right. He's coming back again to the light. If you claim to be in the light, but you hate your brother, you're still in the dark. And see, if you claim to be, if I say, yes, I am in the light. I am following you. I know you, God. But you don't do these things, you're still in the dark. But whoever loves his brother lives in the light, and there is nothing in him to make him stumble. How easy is it to stumble when you're in the dark? When you can't see anything? It's real easy to stumble. But you're in the light, you see things, don't you? More than likely, you're not going to stumble, unless you're like me with big club feet. You can't stumble in the light. But that's why he's making the comparison. You're not going to stumble if you're doing what is right, if you're loving your brother. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. He does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded him. Boy, that's self-explanatory, isn't it? It's blinded him. Is it easy to come back from that when you're blinded? When you get to the point that you're hating so much that you're blinded of where is the light? Is there any light? Like I was saying 2 weeks ago, when you're in the dark room and there is a little bit of light coming through the keyhole, where do you focus? You focus on that light. You don't look over in the dark corner, you focus on the light. But when you hate so much that that keyhole goes black, what do? You don't want to get to that point. You do not want to get to that point. The darkness has blinded him. I've already taken up your time, Dan, for your devotional. Let's start a couple of these verses here. Or do you have enough for 10 minutes? I've given you 10.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Because actually the next part there kind of starts another section.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to Dan here and I'll give him.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes.
So I was thinking, the Samaritans, it was not scriptural, really, honestly, for Jews to avoid, like you're saying, Dan, to avoid the Samaritans. That's a definition of hate. It was not anything in the scriptures that said that they were to have that, avoid Samaritans.
Right. But that was their choice. They wanted to avoid him.
And they thought that was the right thing to do,
Exactly.
but it wasn't.
No. It would, I mean, the Jews wanted to avoid anybody that wasn't Jew. You know, they didn't want anything to do it because they were the chosen people.
So that's kind of another definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And if we get the attitude that, hey, we are the only ones that's good enough for God, is that kind of the same attitude the Jews had? Everybody is on the list for God to save. He wants to save the whole world if he can. But us having an attitude that, we'll pick and choose the ones that need to go, that ain't gonna work. Because he wants all of us.